In a prestigious hospital in Boston, a renowned surgeon stood before his team and delivered words that would echo through the corridors for months to come. He looked down at the file of an 8-year-old girl named Lily, closed it slowly, and said those 5 words that changed everything. No hope remains. Everyone in that sterile conference room agreed with him. The best minds had reviewed her case. Every protocol had been followed. Every treatment had been attempted. There was nothing left to do but accept the inevitable. But then, something extraordinary happened. A senior nurse with 22 years of experience, someone who had already been marked as a troublemaker, a renegade who questioned authority, did something that would have cost her everything. She stood up and looked directly at that surgeon and whispered words that would either save a life or end her career. I still know a way. This is the story of impossible choices, of microconflicts that define careers, of the moment when one woman had to choose between obedience and salvation. This is Hannah's story, and by the end, you'll understand why sometimes, when everyone says there is no way, one person's courage can change everything. My name is Hannah Mitchell, and I need to tell you what it feels like when hope dies inside a hospital. I was standing in the corridor on that Tuesday morning when everything started to unravel. Behind me, in room 423, was a little girl named Lily, and I had watched her struggle for 3 weeks without seeing any improvement. She came to us after a routine surgery went catastrophically wrong. The surgeons tried to fix the complications, then they tried again and again, but nothing worked. Her body simply would not respond to any of the conventional treatments we threw at it. Every single day, I would arrive for my shift and check her vitals, hoping that something, anything, had changed overnight. But the numbers only got worse. The inflammation markers climbed higher. Her organs grew more stressed. The machines around her bed beeped their sad little songs, each sound a reminder that we were losing her. And her parents, God, her parents sat in that waiting room every single day, their eyes searching my face for any sign of hope. And I had nothing to give them. I had already learned early in my career that there is nothing more painful than having to tell someone that you cannot save the person they love most in the world. On that Tuesday morning, the medical team gathered for our clinical meeting. We reviewed Lily's case one final time. The chief surgeon, Dr. Rothschild, a man whose credentials covered entire walls and whose word was absolute law in that hospital. He opened the folder, studied the results for exactly 30 seconds, and then he closed it. The sound of that folder closing was like a door slamming shut on Lily's future. There is no hope, he said, and everyone in that room nodded in agreement. That was the moment everything changed for me. You need to understand something about who I was before this moment because that person was not brave. 3 years earlier, I worked at a different hospital, at a smaller facility in Connecticut. I was a good nurse. I followed every protocol. I questioned nothing. I did exactly as I was told. I believed that the system worked, that the hierarchy existed for a reason, and that my job was to implement care, not to question it. There was a patient named Marcus, a man in his 60s who came in for what should have been routine surgery. I noticed something wrong with his post-operative vitals, something subtle, something that the machines had flagged, but something the doctors dismissed as normal variation. I raised my hand in rounds and suggested we do additional monitoring. The senior physician told me I was being overly cautious. He was the doctor. He knew better. I was the nurse. I should stick to nursing, so I did. I accepted the hierarchy. I accepted that my instinct meant nothing against his credentials. Marcus died 12 hours later from complications that could have been prevented if someone had listened to me. That patient's face, that family's grief, it never left me. I realized that night that silence was a choice, and that choice had consequences. So I changed. I started reading research papers that nobody else was reading. I studied cases that seemed impossible. I questioned protocols that felt outdated, and that made me unpopular. My colleagues at the new hospital started calling me Renegade. The administration began to monitor my actions. I was on thin ice, and everyone knew it, but I refused to be silent again. When I heard Dr. Rothschild say those words, no hope, I saw Marcus's face. I saw the little girl in room 423, and I knew that silence this time was not an option. In the Paninan, clinical meeting was ending. The doctors were gathering their papers, preparing to sign the discharge orders that would transfer Lily to palliative care. Palliative care, in that context, meant we were preparing her and her family to say goodbye. I felt something rising inside me, something between anger and desperation, and an almost violent need to not let this happen again. I stood up. The room went silent. I could feel every eye on me, wondering what the renegade nurse was about to say. "Doctor," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "May I speak?" Dr. Rothschild turned toward me with an expression that suggested I had just committed a crime. In that hospital hierarchy, nurses did not interrupt chief surgeons. Nurses did not offer alternative opinions. Nurses certainly did not contradict decisions that had been finalized. But I did. I told him about a protocol I had discovered, an experimental treatment that had been used in elite clinics in Switzerland, in places like the University Hospital of Zurich, but never at our facility. It was based on new research about inflammatory responses in postoperative complications. It was unproven at our institution. It carried significant risks, but it offered something that conventional medicine no longer offered. It offered a chance. The room erupted. Dr. Rothschild called my suggestion irresponsible, reckless, dangerous. He said I was placing a child's life in jeopardy by suggesting unproven treatments. He was technically right about the risks, but he was wrong about the alternative, because doing nothing was also a death sentence. In that moment, with the entire room watching, with my career hanging by a thread, I looked at the photograph of Lily on the wall, that beautiful smile that should have had so many more years ahead of it, and I whispered the words that would either define my entire career or destroy it completely. I still know a way. The silence that followed was absolute. And then some. The hours after that meeting were chaos. I was summoned to the director's office before my shift even ended. I sat across from a man who had always seemed professional and distant, and now he looked at me like I had personally betrayed the entire medical establishment. He informed me that Dr. Rothschild had filed a formal complaint against me for insubordination, for undermining the authority of the medical team, and for suggesting unproven treatments that could cause harm. The director warned me that I was on the edge of losing my nursing license. One more incident, one more challenge to medical authority, and I would be finished. My nursing career, everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed for, would be over. I left that office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me, but that was only the beginning. My colleagues were suddenly distant. Some of them, nurses I had considered friends for years, started avoiding me in the hallways. I overheard whispers that I was crazy, that I was putting the hospital at legal risk, that I was too emotionally invested in this one patient. One senior nurse who had mentored me pulled me aside and said, "Hannah, I understand you want to help, but you're burning your bridges here. This child is going to die anyway. At least protect yourself." Those words stung, because I could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't wrong about the risks, but she was asking me to accept defeat before the battle had even truly begun. That night, I did something that terrified me. I called Lily's parents and requested a private meeting with them, without the hospital administration present. I knew this could be grounds for immediate termination, but I also knew that Lily's parents deserved to know about options, even unorthodox ones. And the next 48 hours became the most intense research period of my entire life. I consumed every piece of literature available about the Swiss protocol. I scheduled video conferences with specialists in Zurich who spoke to me in halting English about inflammatory pathways and immunological responses. They were honest about the risks, extremely high. They estimated the success rate at less than 10%, but they also confirmed that the science was sound, that the approach had merit, and that without it, Lily's chances were 0%. I spent my own money to obtain the specialized medications required, importing them through channels that probably violated several regulations. I spent hours falsifying some of the administrative paperwork that would be required to authorize the treatment. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was committing fraud, potentially felony fraud, all for a child I barely knew. I would lose my license. I would probably face criminal charges. My name would be destroyed, but I could not think about those things, because if I did, I would paralyze myself completely. One night, during a quiet shift, one of my colleagues confronted me directly. "You're throwing away everything," she said. "You're going to burn down your entire career for someone who is going to die anyway." And in that moment, I felt the doubt crash over me like a wave. What if she was right? What if I was wrong about the protocol? What if Lily died because of my interference? And I had to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. The weight of that possibility almost broke me. I sat, alone in the break room at 2 a.m, and cried. I questioned every choice I had made, but then I went back into Lily's room, and I looked at that sleeping child, and I made a promise. I promised that I would not give up on her. I promised that if there was any possibility, any chance at all, I would fight for it. We started the protocol on a Tuesday evening, during a shift when fewer administrators would be present. I worked with a young resident, named Dr. James Chen, one of the few physicians who believed in the science behind what we were attempting. We also brought in 2 other nurses who I knew I could trust completely, people whose careers I was now jeopardizing along with my own. Dr. Rothschild did not know yet. The administration was unaware. We were operating in the shadows, and every moment felt like we were one discovery away from complete disaster. The first few days of the protocol were agonizing. I monitored every single physiological response, watching every number on every monitor like a hawk. Lily's body was responding, but not in the ways we expected. She developed unexpected side effects. Her fever spiked. Her white blood cell count behaved erratically. I questioned my own judgment constantly. Was I helping her, or was I hastening her decline? There were moments when I was absolutely certain that I had made a catastrophic mistake. One night, during the 6th day of the protocol, Lily had a seizure. Her body convulsed in the bed, and alarms screamed all around us. My heart nearly stopped. I coordinated the emergency response with every ounce of skill I possessed. We administered medications to stop the seizure. We stabilized her vital signs. Every second felt like an eternity. When she finally calmed, when her body finally stopped shaking, I excused myself and went to the bathroom and wept. I could not tell if those were tears of relief or tears of guilt. When I returned to her room, when I saw her small chest rising and falling steadily, I knew I could not turn back now. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The only way forward was through. On the 12th day of the protocol, something shifted. The numbers on the monitor began to move in the direction we had been hoping for. Lily's inflammatory markers started to decrease. Her organ function showed signs of improvement for the first time in weeks. I performed additional tests. I checked the results twice, then 3 times, terrified that I was misreading the data, that this was some kind of false hope. But it was real. Lily was responding. For the first time since her collapse, the word that her parents had stopped daring to speak began to whisper itself into existence: hope. I experienced the most intense combination of emotions I have ever felt in my entire life. Gratitude mixed with guilt, relief mixed with terror. I knew that this moment of scientific vindication was also the moment when everything we had done would be exposed, and exposure meant consequences. I was right. On the very next day, someone discovered the imported medications. I still do not know if it was an accident or if someone deliberately revealed what was happening. A member of the cleaning staff saw the specialized pharmaceuticals and reported it to administration. Within hours, the entire hierarchy of the hospital knew that I had implemented an unauthorized protocol using unapproved medications. I was summoned to another meeting, this time with administrators, medical board representatives, and hospital legal counsel. I knew exactly what was coming. I knew that I would be terminated. I knew that there would likely be criminal charges. I knew that my career was finished. But Lily was alive, and she was getting better, and I realized in that moment that some things in life are worth the cost, even when the cost is everything. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. At this point in the story, what do you think should happen to Hannah? Do you believe she was right to take this risk? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think about her choice, and where you believe this story should go from here. Your perspective matters. And after you comment, keep watching, because what happens next will absolutely shock you. The meeting in the conference room was the most terrifying moment of my professional life. I sat across from people whose job it was to enforce the rules, and I knew I had broken those rules in the most serious way possible. I had falsified documents. I had obtained unauthorized medications. I had implemented a treatment protocol without proper approval. Everything I had feared for 3 weeks was coming true. But then something extraordinary happened. Dr. Rothschild entered the room, and his expression was not anger. It was something I had not expected to see from him. It was the look of someone who had been proven wrong, and who was willing to admit it. He had spent the previous day analyzing Lily's results. He had reviewed every data point, every test, every measurement of her physiological response to the protocol, and he could not deny what the science was showing him. He stood before that conference room, before the administrators, before the legal counsel, before everyone, and he said something that I never thought I would hear from him. He apologized. Not a superficial apology, not a political apology designed to minimize liability. He apologized for his initial judgment. He acknowledged that his assessment of Lily's case had been incorrect. He admitted that the protocol I had suggested had succeeded where conventional medicine had failed. He looked directly at me and said, "You were right, and I was wrong, and you saved that child's life." I felt tears streaming down my face. The administrator shifted uncomfortably. The legal counsel looked confused about how to proceed now that the primary witness against me was testifying in my favor. And then Dr. Rothschild made an announcement that stunned everyone in the room. He recommended that the hospital investigate this protocol not as a disciplinary matter, but as a potential new treatment approach that could revolutionize how we handle post-operative complications. The hospital would fund a proper study. The protocol would be validated through rigorous clinical trials, and I would be at the center of this research initiative. Within a matter of minutes, I went from being a nurse whose career was about to end to being a nurse who was going to help change the face of modern medicine. I was offered a promotion. The administration wanted to make me head of a new department, but I declined. I realized that what I needed was not prestige or advancement. What I needed was to stay with the patients. 6 months later, I stood in the corridor of the hospital and watched as Lily walked out the front door. She moved on her own 2 feet. She smiled at her parents. She held her mother's hand and looked back at the hospital one final time, not with the fear that had defined her admission, but with the gratitude of someone who had been given a second life. Lily's mother approached me one last time. She pulled me into an embrace and whispered in my ear, "You never let us give up. When everyone else told us to accept the end, you showed us there was still a beginning." I felt the weight of those words settle into my chest. This job, this exhausting, heartbreaking, beautiful job of being a nurse, it is not about the moments of triumph. Those moments are rare. This job is about the thousands of moments in between, the quiet moments where you show up and try, even when success seems impossible. The hospital implemented the protocol. Other institutions began requesting information about it. The research was published. Eventually, the treatment was introduced in hospitals across the country, but I did not pursue promotions or speaking engagements or any of the opportunities that came my way. I stayed in the hospital. I stayed with the patients. I stayed in the rooms where people were struggling and suffering and hoping, because I learned something essential through this experience, that the greatest work we do is the work that no one acknowledges, the work that happens in the quiet hours of the night shift, the work of showing up and refusing to let someone die alone. My colleagues call me a legend. The administration treats me with deference, but I do not think of myself that way. I think of myself as someone who was given a choice and who chose correctly. That is all. My name is Hannah Mitchell, and I have been a nurse in Boston for 22 years. But that detail about my name, about my location, about my years of service, those are just facts. The real story is not about me specifically. It is about you. This is the part where I speak directly to whoever is watching this. If you are a healthcare worker, a nurse, a doctor, a therapist, a paramedic, then you need to hear this message. You are being asked to work within systems that are broken. You are being told to follow protocols that do not always serve human beings. You are being pressured to accept the hierarchy, to not question authority, to understand your place in a structure that privileges credentials over compassion. And sometimes, you will reach a breaking point where you have to choose, do I obey the system, or do I serve the person in front of me? I cannot answer that question for you, but I can tell you that I chose to serve the person in front of me, and that choice cost me nearly everything. It also saved a life. If you are a patient or a family member who has been told that there is no hope, I want you to know something. Medical science is not infallible. Statistics do not capture the full reality of human possibility. Sometimes, there is a way that people have not yet discovered. Sometimes, there is hope hiding in the spaces between what we know and what we have yet to learn. And sometimes, all it takes is one person who believes in that possibility enough to risk everything for it. If you watch this story and you felt something shift inside you, some recognition that you have been complicit in accepting what you were told to accept, that you have been too quiet about things that matter, then this message is especially for you. Do not wait. Do not spend years regretting that you did not speak. Do not let another Marcus die. Do not let another Lily give up hope. Be the person who says, I still know a way. Be brave enough to be wrong. Be compassionate enough to risk everything. That is what it means to be human. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If this video touched something inside you, please share it. If you are a healthcare worker who has felt pressured to stay silent, please know you are not alone. Subscribe to this channel so you can hear more stories like this one. Stories of people who chose courage over comfort. And click the notification bell so you never miss a new story. The next video I want you to watch explores what happens when the system fights back against those who challenge it. You will not believe what occurred after Hannah's victory. See you in the next one.